The afternoon light in my Seattle apartment had a quiet softness to it, the kind that stretched gently across the kitchen table where I was sorting through receipts and final confirmations for Lily's wedding. Papers rustled under my fingers, numbers neatly highlighted in soft yellow marker. Each line a record of the money I had poured into a ceremony that wasn't even mine. The room felt peaceful in a way my life rarely did, and for a brief moment, I believed I had finally done something that would matter, something that would bring the kind of closeness I had spent years hoping my family might someday offer freely. Then my phone buzzed face down on the table, the vibration skittering across the wood like a small warning I didn't yet understand. I flipped it over casually, expecting a simple question from the planner or a note from a vendor needing approval. Instead, 4 words stared back at me with an emptiness so sharp it felt like someone had poured ice water down the back of my spine. Don't come to the wedding. That was it. No explanation. No punctuation. No apology softened behind the words. Just a dismissal so blunt it took my breath before I even realized I had stopped breathing. I sat there in the warm light, holding the phone in one hand and the receipt for the final $28,000 venue payment in the other, my brain struggling to reconcile the two realities sitting inches apart on my kitchen table. A week before, Lily had sent me photos of the ballroom she said she couldn't believe was real. "This is my dream, Mandy," she had whispered over the phone, her voice trembling with excitement. "You're making my dream come true." But now, the same sister whose happiness I had been building piece by piece, one invoice at a time, had erased me with 4 words. First, I thought it had to be a mistake. A joke. Something meant for someone else. I reread the message slowly, my chest tightening with each pass. The words didn't change. They didn't soften. If anything, they grew heavier, like small stones piling quietly on my lungs. I called her immediately, heart pounding hard enough that my hands trembled around the phone. She didn't answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. A third time. Nothing. I leaned back in my chair, the kitchen suddenly feeling smaller, as though the walls had shifted closer without warning. My whole life had been shaped by other people's comfort, by making myself useful, by anticipating needs, by fixing things quietly in the background. But no amount of preparation had readied me for the feeling of being cut out of something I had built with my own 2 hands. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. "Mom." I answered before the first ring finished, my voice tighter than I intended. She didn't say hello. Didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't acknowledge the message that was still burning in the center of my chest. Instead, she exhaled softly and slipped into the tone she reserved for moments when she needed something difficult from me. "Amanda, sweetheart. Don't take Lily's message personally. She and Patricia just want everything peaceful. You know how you can be intense." The word hit me harder than I expected. Not because of what it meant, but because of how familiar it was. Intense. Too direct. Too firm. Too much. My whole life they had shaped me into the dependable one. The one who absorbed the chaos, who smoothed the edges, who stayed silent when silence made everyone else comfortable. And now that same strength they'd leaned on for decades had been reframed as a threat to peace. "I paid for everything," I said quietly, each word steady but wounded. Mom sighed. "You're strong, Amanda. You understand." There it was. The sentence that had become the cornerstone of my entire childhood. "You're strong. You understand." It was never a compliment. It was permission. Permission for them to expect more from me than they ever expected from Lily. Permission to dismiss my needs because I could swallow disappointment without making a scene. Permission to erase me from a wedding I had financed because my feelings were always the ones most easily ignored. I hung up before she could say anything else because if I didn't, I knew I would bend out of habit the way I always had. For a long moment, I just sat at the table, staring at the contracts still open on my laptop. The silence in the apartment grew deeper, thicker, as if even the air understood something inside me had been pushed too far. I should have felt grief, or humiliation, or the kind of heartbreak that pulls you apart at the seams. But I didn't. What I felt instead was something clearer, colder, sharper recognition. Because as I scanned the documents again, reading not with emotion but with clarity, a detail surfaced that I had overlooked in the chaos of planning a $100,000 wedding. A detail that had been sitting right there in plain sight. Every single contract, venue, catering, flowers, band, decor was under one name. Mine. The power they believed they had never belonged to them. The authority they assumed they could wield so casually had never been theirs. The wedding they had tried to erase me from was legally tied to me in every binding clause of every signed agreement. I leaned back in my chair slowly, my breath steadying into a calm I hadn't felt in years. The weight of their dismissal didn't crush me. It clarified me. Because for the first time in my life, I saw the imbalance not as a burden I had to carry, but as a weapon they had handed me themselves without realizing it. The evening shifted around me, the room darkening as the sun dipped behind the skyline. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there, letting the steady Seattle rain tap softly against the window, while I reread the venue contract with a deliberate calm. The clause was simple, stark, almost elegant in its precision. Primary signer retains full cancellation rights. I whispered the words under my breath as the truth settled into place. They wanted peace. They wanted me gone. Fine. I would give them exactly what they asked for, wrapped so neatly in legal clarity that none of them could argue. Not my mother with her practiced guilt. Not Lily with her fragile tears. Not Patricia with her sharp judgments disguised as courtesy. None of them. And when the moment came, when everything they had dismissed me for collapsed beneath them, they would finally understand exactly who they had erased. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of anger, and not because of heartbreak, but because a kind of quiet awakening had taken hold of me, the kind that doesn't let you rest until you fully understood its meaning. I sat in the same kitchen chair for hours, the document spread open in front of me like a map to a destination I had never considered before. The wedding wasn't just an event I had helped plan. It was an empire I had accidentally built. Every vendor who praised Lily for her perfect vision had been speaking to me. Every deadline that Lily ignored was one I met. Every crisis smoothed over, every detail polished, every bill paid. It had all been done by the sister they had pushed aside with a single text message. The realization didn't hurt. It clarified. It stripped away the last illusions I had carried about my place in our family. As the hours slipped by, the night deepening outside my windows, I replayed the subtle shifts over the last few months, the planner quietly removing me from email chains, the florist addressing decisions to Lily instead of me, the band coordinator sending updates directly to her fiancé. I remembered the moment I first felt something go off track. Patricia's polite but dismissive smile during our joint call about the rehearsal dinner. The way her voice softened artificially when she said she wanted the ceremony to feel peaceful, as though peace was something I had threatened simply by existing. I didn't understand it then, but I understood it perfectly now. They hadn't wanted help. They had wanted ownership. Ownership over a celebration they assumed I would fund and fade out of. They wanted the benefits of my generosity without the presence of my existence. And when they realized I wasn't as invisible as they wished, they decided to push me aside. But the one mistake they made, the one mistake every single one of them made, was believing I was still the girl who accepted being pushed. The girl who always stepped aside. The girl who always understood, even when understanding meant erasing myself. That version of me had died the moment I read that text. In her place stood a woman who could finally see the imbalance clearly. A woman who wasn't going to let them rewrite her out of a story she authored. I turned back to the venue contract again, scanning it for anything I might have missed. But the clause was clear, firm, and legally binding. I held the power. Completely. Unequivocally. Not because I wanted it, but because they had handed it to me in their eagerness to avoid responsibility. They had assumed I would pay but never act. They had counted on my silence, the same silence they had relied on my whole life. What they didn't realize was that the strongest silence isn't the one that endures injustice. It's the one that prepares for change. Around 3 a.m, with the contracts fully reviewed and the weight of clarity settling comfortably across my shoulders, I opened my laptop and drafted the first email. My fingers didn't shake. My breath didn't hitch. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no doubt. The text message they had sent me gave me the permission they thought I would never take. In a strange way, I felt grateful. Grateful that they had finally shown me exactly where I stood. Grateful that I no longer needed to fight for a place in a family that saw me as a resource rather than a person. Grateful that the moment they erased me was the same moment I found myself. I typed the email slowly, deliberately. Hello, Kimberly. As the primary signer on this event, I am formally requesting cancellation, effective immediately. Proceed according to contract terms. Amanda. I read the message twice, not to check for errors, but to marvel at the stillness inside my chest. The woman who used to tremble at the thought of disappointing anyone was gone. The woman writing this email didn't tremble at all. I hovered over the send button for a single breath, then clicked. The sound of the email leaving my outbox was soft, almost insignificant, yet it carried the weight of a decade's worth of swallowed feelings. And once I sent the first, the others followed effortlessly. One email to the catering company, one to the florist, one to the band, one to the decor team. Each cancellation was more than an action, it was a reclamation, a declaration, a return to myself. When the final email left my inbox, the sky outside was beginning to shift. That soft Pacific Northwest gray that slips in before sunrise crept across the horizon, washing the tops of buildings in silvery light. I stood up slowly, stretching muscles stiff from hours of sitting, and walked to the window. The world outside was silent, undisturbed, unaware that my own world had tilted completely overnight. I wrapped my arms loosely around myself, not for warmth but for grounding. For the first time in years, my reflection didn't look tired. It looked aware. It looked steady. It looked like a woman whose story was finally being written by her own hand. I stepped back from the window and made coffee, letting the warm aroma fill the kitchen. As I poured it into my favorite mug, one Lily had always teased me for, calling it too plain, I felt something in my chest loosen and expand. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt free. And freedom, I realized, wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet. It was steady. It was a slow exhale after years of holding my breath. They had told me not to come to the wedding. So I wasn't coming. I was taking the wedding with me. When the sun finally rose, casting its faint glow across my kitchen counters, I sat down with my coffee and whispered to the stillness around me, as if naming the truth out loud made it real. They erased me. Now they will understand what it means to lose the one they relied on. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. The beginning of a glow I hadn't felt in years. The morning after I canceled, everything arrived wrapped in a strange hush, the kind that doesn't settle around you by accident, but breathes its way into a home that has finally stopped carrying other people's expectations. I stood in my kitchen with the same cup of coffee I'd made countless times before, but it tasted different, warmer, somehow lighter, almost like it belonged to a softer version of life I'd forgotten I could have. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It felt like space. Open, empty in the right way, free of demands or obligations or a lifelong pressure to keep everyone else comfortable. As I sipped, my mind drifted back through years of being the dependable one, the stable one, the daughter and sister who never made noise, never needed anything, never complicated the surface of a family that refused to acknowledge its own fractures. And I began to realize, the betrayal of being erased from the wedding wasn't a sudden blow. It was the final echo of a pattern that had shaped my life since childhood. Growing up in Spokane, the dynamic in our home had been as stable as it was uneven, scripted, almost. My mother always said Lily was sensitive, fragile in a way that required constant protection. She described Lily like she was made of glass, something that would shatter if anyone raised their voice, questioned her decisions, or asked her to handle discomfort. And because Lily was the fragile one, I was assigned the opposite role by default. Strong, steady, the daughter who didn't need anything. The daughter who handled her own scraped knees, filled out her own permission slips, taught herself to braid her own hair in the bathroom mirror while mom drove Lily to her third attempt at a ballet class she'd quit 2 weeks later. It's strange how those tiny, ordinary moments become the architecture of a lifetime. How a family learns to rely on one child so completely that they forget she has a breaking point. It wasn't that I resented Lily. I didn't. She was sweet in her own way, soft-spoken, easily overwhelmed, the kind of girl who couldn't finish a sentence without checking someone's face for reassurance. But the more fragile she was allowed to be, the stronger I was expected to become. And strength in my family didn't look like resilience, it looked like silence. I learned early that the fastest way to make everything okay was to swallow my own needs, to nod politely, to stay calm even when something inside me was shaking. My feelings were inconvenient. My steadiness was useful. That formula shaped every decision, every dynamic, every conversation. So when Lily wanted the dream wedding she couldn't afford, of course I stepped in. Of course I said yes. Of course I paid. Not because I didn't have boundaries, but because no one ever taught me I was allowed to have them. I thought about the night Lily first told me she was getting married. She had called me crying, voice trembling with the same excited panic she used to have when she opened Christmas presents too fast. "He proposed," she whispered, almost breathless. "Amanda, he actually proposed." I remember smiling into the phone, feeling something tender unfold inside me. A quiet pride, maybe, or the hope that this wedding might finally be the moment where our family saw me not for what I provided, but for who I was. But that hope lasted only until Mom called the same evening. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about my day. She just launched into her familiar script. "Your sister wants something beautiful. Something meaningful. You're so good at handling things, sweetheart. Can you help her?" It wasn't a request. It was an assignment. And like every assignment before it, I accepted without question. Because that was the role I had been trained to play. The fixer, the planner, the invisible backbone holding everything together. As the months passed, the wedding became a second job. One that consumed my evenings, my weekends, my savings, and slowly, without me noticing, parts of my self-worth. Lily called me daily with ideas, worries, Pinterest boards overflowing with must-haves. She cried when the first dress fitting went wrong. She cried when the imported flowers were delayed. She cried when the ballroom she wanted was fully booked. Until I made 3 calls and somehow secured a cancellation spot that magically opened the date for her. Every time she cried, Mom praised her sensitivity and praised my strength, turning both into cages neither of us could escape. Lily's fragility made her lovable. My strength made me useful. It was a painful contrast I didn't fully understand until the night she sent me the text that cut me out with surgical precision. As I stood in my quiet kitchen now, I let those memories wash through me. Not to blame anyone, but to finally understand. The erasure hadn't started with the text message. It started decades ago when my mother decided which daughter needed nurturing, and which one could be neglected without consequence. It started every time I was told to be the bigger person, the calmer person, the one who understood. It started when needing anything made me a burden, but giving everything made me noble. The truth settled slowly, like dust in a sunbeam. Lily wasn't cruel. She was conditioned. My mother wasn't malicious. She was blind. And I wasn't weak. I had simply been told so many times that I could carry the weight of everyone else's comfort, that I forgot to question why I'd been given the weight at all. The planner's earlier shift, the email she stopped sending me, the approval she rerouted to Lily, suddenly made sense too. Patricia had entered the picture. And Patricia, with her polished composure and delicate judgments, had looked at me exactly the way the world looks at women who do too much, with suspicion. She saw my strength not as devotion but as a threat to her control. She saw my presence not as support, but as something that might overshadow the narrative she wanted for her son's wedding. She didn't understand me, so she erased me. And Lily, conditioned to believe that keeping fragile peace was more important than honoring the person who built the entire celebration, let her. Understanding the past didn't absolve them, but it explained why none of them saw the storm they had created. As I walked from the kitchen into the living room, I paused by the window, letting the gray Seattle light brush my face. The weight in my chest eased. Not because the betrayal hurt less, but because I wasn't carrying it blindly anymore. The past had shaped the wound, but the present was shaping something else entirely. A quiet, steady transformation. A rise I hadn't planned but could finally feel beginning somewhere deep within me. In that moment, the truth settled into its final shape. They erased me because they thought I wouldn't notice. They erased me because they thought I'd stay quiet. But they forgot something. Strength doesn't disappear. It waits. And mine had waited long enough. The days after the text felt strangely disorienting, as if someone had tilted the axis of my life just enough to make everything slightly off balance. Even the ordinary objects in my apartment, the coffee mug, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the stack of mail I hadn't opened yet, looked unfamiliar, like props from someone else's routine. I moved through those first hours in a kind of suspended awareness, neither angry nor heartbroken, but quietly absorbing the truth of what had happened. Betrayal doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it settles softly, one layer at a time, until you finally recognize that the world you were standing in was never stable to begin with. And that recognition, subtle as it was, became the first thread in the slow unraveling of everything I thought I understood about my family, my role, and the wedding I had built with my own hands. In the early afternoon, I opened my laptop again, not because I wanted to think about the wedding, but because I needed to confront the reality I had overlooked for too long. The wedding planner's shared folder hadn't updated in days, something I had brushed aside as a simple oversight. Now, when I scrolled through it with a clearer mind, I noticed the gaps I'd talked myself out of questioning. The most recent seating chart wasn't there. The floral finalization form I was waiting on had been replaced by an older version. Vendor briefings were missing entirely. For months, the documents had flowed effortlessly through me, like a current I had learned to navigate with practiced ease. But now the stream had dried up, quietly, intentionally, without a single explanation. I sat there, staring at the empty spaces where my involvement used to exist, and I felt something inside me shift. They hadn't simply forgotten to include me. They had begun the process of removing me long before the text arrived. My phone buzzed while I was still staring at the screen. It was the florist, one of the few vendors who had always been kind to me. For a moment, I thought she might be reaching out about the cancellation. Instead, her voicemail came through after a single ring, her voice warm in a way that suddenly felt unfamiliar. "Hi Amanda, just checking in. Lily confirmed the final floral choices this morning, so we're moving ahead. Let me know if anything changes." I froze. Lily confirmed. My sister had approved the $18,000 floral arrangement I had paid for without mentioning it to me, without even looping me in, as if my involvement had already been written out of the script. I put the phone down slowly, letting the truth settle another inch deeper. This wasn't a last-minute decision made in panic. This was a transition, subtle, steady, intentional, of shifting responsibility toward me and shifting recognition toward her. And I hadn't noticed because I had been too busy carrying everything for them. Later that evening, I went for a walk around my block, hoping fresh air might shake the heaviness gathering in my chest. The Seattle sky was dim, washed in soft blues and grays, the kind of weather that usually calmed me. But that day, the quiet made my thoughts louder. I remembered how the planner's emails had changed weeks ago, how her tone had shifted from collaborative to clipped, how she had started addressing Lily directly, how the warmth that once existed between us had been quietly redirected. At the time, I convinced myself it was because the wedding was nearing and the planner wanted to focus on details. But now I knew better. Somewhere behind the scenes, decisions had been made about my place in this event. Decisions I wasn't invited to participate in. Decisions that treated me like a sponsor, not a sister. As I walked past the little bookstore at the corner, I remembered Patricia's voice during our one video call. The soft, polished tone. The careful phrasing. The way her eyes narrowed just slightly whenever I spoke, as though she was studying me the way you study something that doesn't fit where you want it to. "We want the ceremony to feel peaceful," she had said, lingering on the word peaceful with a kind of pointed sweetness that now, in hindsight, felt almost insulting. At the time, I thought she simply wanted a low-stress event. But now, understanding the pattern, I saw the truth. She wasn't trying to avoid stress. She was trying to avoid me. She wanted a wedding sculpted by my money but untouched by my presence. A wedding polished enough to impress her social circle, curated enough to appear perfect, and sanitized enough to remove any trace of the sister who had made it possible. When I returned home, the lights in my apartment felt softer somehow, the shadows gentler. But inside me, something firm was beginning to take shape. Not anger, not bitterness, clarity. Clarity so quiet it almost felt like grief, but steadier, cleaner. I sat on the couch, letting my body sink into the cushions as I tried to understand how long they had been planning around me. It must have started small, Lily wanting to take control of one detail, then another. Patricia encouraging her, feeding the idea that the wedding should reflect only their side of the family. My mother, always eager to avoid confrontation, nodding along with anything that made Lily feel safe, even if it meant pushing me aside. They had wanted the wedding to look perfect, and in their vision I didn't fit the image. But the irony of it all, the quiet, poetic irony, was that the entire wedding, the venue, the flowers, the decor, the music, was legally tied to the person they didn't want there. Me. I had paid for everything, signed everything, shouldered everything. Their dream existed because of my work, and yet they wanted to cut me out of the picture like a smudge on the corner of a photograph. The thought didn't hurt the way it once would have. It simply opened my eyes. Because the truth I had been too loyal to see was now crystal clear. They never believed I mattered. They only believed what I provided mattered. And when they thought they no longer needed me, they removed me. As I sat there, a soft gust of wind brushed the window, making the blind sway just slightly. The movement felt symbolic somehow, like the world had exhaled on my behalf. That was when the calm began. The kind of quiet calm that arrives only when the truth finally lands in its full weight. They had erased me, yes, but they had also given me something I had never had before. The chance to walk away with clarity instead of guilt. They thought they could make decisions without me because they assumed I would stay quiet. But calm isn't silence. Calm is preparation. Calm is the moment before revelation. And this unraveling, the planner's silence, the vendor's redirecting communication, Patricia's scrutiny, Lily's distance, wasn't just the breakdown of wedding plans. It was the exposure of a lifetime of being expected to carry everything without being seen. They didn't see me unraveling. They didn't see me rising. They only saw the version of me that served them. They never imagined the version of me that might stop. And in the quiet of that evening, with the sky dimming beyond my window, I felt the first soft spark of something that had been waiting inside me for years. A beginning, not an ending. A reclaiming. A quiet, steady glow. The next morning, the unraveling became undeniable. It didn't arrive as an explosion. It arrived as a series of quiet confirmations, each one slipping into my inbox like a whispered truth I had ignored for too long. The first email came from the venue coordinator, a polite message thanking me for the previous approvals. She wrote it as though I was a silent investor rather than the architect of the entire event. The second email came from the caterers, forwarding a note Lily had sent about last-minute dessert changes. It was a request I should have received weeks earlier. They copied me this time, probably because they assumed I already knew. But I didn't. And that realization, small, sharp, unexpectedly painful, cut more deeply than I expected. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, letting each message wash over me. It wasn't the exclusion that hurt. It was the ease with which it happened. The world they were building around this wedding no longer had a place for me, except as someone who paid the bills. It felt like watching a house I had built being furnished by strangers, each room filled with choices I wasn't invited to make. I could trace the shift back to one moment, Patricia entering the picture with her cool poise and gentle disdain. She had studied me the way people study something they can't categorize. Too calm, too competent, too central. And women like Patricia don't like anything they can't control. She had placed her hand on Lily's back during that video call, smiling sweetly and said, "Let's just simplify things." But what she meant was, "Let's remove anything we can't dominate." And Lily, conditioned to avoid conflict, had followed her lead. I could imagine their whispered conversations, the planning behind my back, the slow reassignment of responsibilities to make it seem natural when they pushed me out. I could imagine my mother nodding along, reassuring them all that I wouldn't mind, that I was too strong to be hurt, as if strength and numbness were the same thing. The planner, sensing the shift in authority, had aligned herself with the bride and future in-laws, not with the woman who had paid her invoices. People always gravitate toward the center of a story, and in their eyes Lily was the center. I was just the scaffolding holding everything up. Scaffolding is removed once the building looks impressive enough. By noon my phone began buzzing with messages I didn't want to open. Vendors asking Lily questions directly. My mother sending short, firm texts. Lily replying with single words. I felt the distance between us widening with every hour, like a rope slowly being pulled through my hands until all that remained was friction, and the faint memory of connection. But beneath that ache something else was forming. A steady growing certainty that this wasn't a personal attack. It was a long-standing dynamic reaching its breaking point. I had spent my entire life being the reliable one, the strong one, the invisible one. But invisibility carries a cost. When you teach people they don't have to consider you, they eventually stop seeing you altogether. Later that afternoon, I opened the wedding planner's online portal, something I hadn't done for a week because I had assumed everything was moving smoothly. What I found there wasn't a mess, but an intentional order created without me. The seating chart had been finalized. The rehearsal timeline adjusted. The vendor notes updated. Decisions made. All without a single check-in, call, or courtesy message. The planner, so warm at the beginning, had turned efficient and cold. Her communication shortened to one-line updates directed exclusively at Lily. It wasn't incompetence. It was alignment. She had chosen the bride's emotional comfort over my financial responsibility. And Lily had let her. I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of the truth settle into place. They weren't just removing me. They were rewriting the wedding as if I had never been part of it. As if the months of planning, the money, the late-night decisions, the tears Lily shed in my living room meant nothing now that the finish line was in sight. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. And oddly, that realization didn't ignite anger. It ignited clarity. Clarity so sharp it felt like stepping into cold water. Clarity that brought every memory into focus. Like the summer Lily quit her job and moved into my apartment without warning, and I rearranged my life to support her. Like the time Mom insisted I loan Lily money because she can't handle that kind of pressure. Like the countless birthdays, holidays, emergencies where my reliability was treated as obligation, not love. And now the wedding $100,000 of my effort was the final chapter in that lifelong pattern. As the clock ticked toward evening, I realized something I should have seen years ago. My family didn't rely on me because they valued me. They relied on me because they believed I would never stop giving. But this time the giving had reached a line I didn't even know existed within me. And when they crossed it, something inside me finally shifted into place. Around 5, I received a message from the planner that made everything unmistakably clear. Hi Amanda. Just confirming that Lily approved the final adjustments. Everything is ready for rehearsal week. Thank you for supporting her dream. Supporting her dream. Not building it. Not creating it. Just supporting it. Like a background character applauding the protagonist. I stared at the screen for a long time, the words settling like embers in a fire that had been burning low for years. It wasn't the planner's fault. She was simply reflecting the hierarchy Lily and Patricia had created. And in that hierarchy, I was no longer a participant. I was a resource. But the irony of it all, the quiet poetic irony, was that the dream they were erasing me from was a dream that existed legally because of me. Every signature in that folder belonged to me. Every contract carried my authority. Every bill had been charged to my account. They thought erasing me would be easy. They thought removing me wouldn't matter. They thought telling me don't come to the wedding would be the end of it. But what they didn't see, what they could never have imagined, was that their attempt to exclude me had placed all the power they wanted for themselves directly in my hands. The unraveling wasn't just happening around me. It was happening for me. Quietly. Deliberately. Inevitably. And by the time the collapse reached them, they would have no idea where it began. Or that it began the moment they sent me those 4 words. Don't come to the wedding. The day after the unraveling reached its peak, my apartment felt colder than usual, as if the air had shifted to mirror the quiet collapse inside me. I moved through the room slowly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of the counter, the smooth surface of the table I had eaten countless solitary meals on. These objects didn't comfort me. They simply witnessed me, the way silent things do when the world has taken something from you, and left nothing to fill the empty space. Even the morning light felt different, muted, almost gray, as if the sky understood what had been taken from me. And though I had found clarity, though I had uncovered truth, the emotional weight still pressed against my ribs like a quiet ache I couldn't fully inhale past. Betrayal has a way of hollowing out even the strongest heart, not through drama, but through the realization that you were never valued the way you believed. I made coffee the way I always did, but this time the cup trembled just slightly in my hand, not from anger, not from fear, from something more unfamiliar, a sadness that wasn't sharp. It was soft, worn, almost tender. A sadness that came from recognizing how deeply I had shaped my life around people who never saw me the same way I saw them. The kitchen held echoes of my sacrifices, late-night planning calls, spreadsheets open past midnight, budgets adjusted to fit Lily's whims. Every corner carried the weight of a sister who wanted perfection and a family who wanted convenience, while I had wanted only one thing: to belong, to matter, to be invited into the celebration of something I had built. But the wound wasn't the text message. The wound was realizing they had never seen me as someone worth protecting from that cruelty. By noon the weight grew heavier. I sat on the edge of my bed with the curtains drawn halfway, letting dim light spill across the sheets. My chest tightened in a slow, aching way, like grief, but not grief for them. Grief for myself. Grief for the girl I had been at 16, who learned to swallow disappointment without showing it. For the young woman who stayed quiet during arguments so Lily wouldn't feel stressed. For the adult who sent money she couldn't spare because mom said, "Your sister can't handle pressure." Grief for every version of myself that believed strength meant silence. I sat there for a long time, hands resting loosely in my lap, feeling the years of self-neglect stretch out inside me like a long corridor I had been walking without noticing the exhaustion in my own steps. It wasn't the wedding I mourned. It was the truth I could no longer unsee. That I had been loyal to people who treated me like a utility. That I had poured love into places that returned only expectations. That I had spent a lifetime learning to be small so others could remain comfortable. There is a quiet kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from realizing you were alone even when surrounded by the people you loved most. And that loneliness settled around me now like fog curling softly against a window pane. I folded my arms around myself, not to stop the sadness but to acknowledge it, because feeling it meant I was finally seeing myself clearly. Late in the afternoon I curled into the corner of the couch, knees pulled up, a blanket wrapped loosely around my shoulders. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the heater. I stared at nothing for a long time, letting my mind float. Memories surfaced in fragments, laughing with Lily as kids over a spilled bowl of cereal, sitting alone in my room at 13 because mom said Lily needed her attention more, paying Lily's college deposit after she missed every deadline, stepping in last year when she lost her job and needed help with rent. None of these memories hurt individually, but together they formed a pattern so clear it was like reading a story I had lived but never fully understood. A story where my role had never changed no matter how old we grew. And yet beneath the ache something else stirred. Something small but undeniable. It fluttered at the edges of my awareness like the faintest spark trying to catch light. A thought. Flicker. A beginning. Maybe this wasn't the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning. I let that thought settle slowly in my chest. Not with force. Not with urgency. With quiet acceptance. Because even in the heaviness I could feel something shifting, like the first breath after a long cry, when the world feels raw but open again. This wasn't about ruining Lily's wedding. This was about reclaiming the pieces of myself I had given away, one quiet sacrifice at a time. This was about letting the fall happen so the rise could begin. As dusk settled outside, casting soft lavender light across my living room, I stood up and walked to the window. The city was glowing in the distance. Office lights flickering on, car headlights sliding along wet streets, distant voices drifting up from the sidewalk. The world kept moving, indifferent to the ache inside me. And strangely, that steadiness comforted me. Life didn't pause for heartbreak. It carried on. And somewhere in that movement I realized I could choose how to move forward too. I rested my hands on the window frame, and for the first time since the text, I felt my breath deepen. Not fully, but enough. Enough to know that I wouldn't collapse. Enough to know that I wouldn't let this break me in the way they expected. Enough to know that I had more strength in me than the version of myself they had written out of their wedding. The fall had happened. The isolation had arrived. The wound was open. But beneath it all, quietly, almost imperceptibly, a spark had been lit. A spark that whispered, "You're not done yet." That evening, after hours of sitting in the quiet shadow of my own thoughts, I finally stood up and walked to the kitchen sink. I turned on the faucet, letting cold water run over my hands as if the earth itself was trying to steady me. The sound of it, soft, steady, unbroken, felt grounding in a way I desperately needed. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly as the coolness traveled up my arms. For a moment, I imagined the water carrying away the exhaustion I had collected from a lifetime of being responsible for everyone but myself. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the ache. But it eased the edges of it just enough for me to stand a little straighter. I dried my hands and looked around my apartment, really looked. The space was small but warm, filled with pieces I had chosen, memories I had made, accomplishments I had earned with a quiet resilience no one in my family ever celebrated. For so long I believed my worth came from what I did for others. But standing there in a home built from my own effort, I felt that belief begin to crack. Not fully, but enough for a new truth to shine through. I had a life outside of them. A life that existed even when they didn't see it. And if I stepped back, stepped away, stepped out, my world wouldn't collapse the way theirs would. I sat on the couch and pulled a blanket around my shoulders, letting the fabric fall softly across my arms. The room was dim except for a warm lamp in the corner. It cast a gentle glow across the walls, turning the space into something softer, almost like a sanctuary. And in that calm, something shifted inside me. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but slowly, like dawn easing its way across a dark horizon. I realized I wasn't just hurt by what they had done. I was tired. Tired of earning love instead of receiving it. Tired of being dependable instead of being appreciated. Tired of being the strong one while everyone else got to be fragile. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, the screen lighting up my quiet living room. I didn't look at it. I already knew who it would be. My mother. Lily. Maybe even Patricia, though the thought of her number on my caller ID made my stomach twist with a cold kind of resolve. I didn't owe any of them my attention. Not tonight. Not after everything. I let the phone buzz until it fell silent again. And when it did, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt liberating. As the hours passed, the apartment grew darker, but the heaviness inside me slowly lifted. Not because I forgave them, not yet, but because I finally understood something vital. The pain they caused was rooted in a system they built long before I had the strength to question it. A system where Lily needed protecting and I needed minimizing. A system where my mother rewarded dependency and took advantage of reliability. A system where Patricia saw me as an inconvenience because she couldn't manipulate a woman who didn't bend easily. They hadn't erased me because I was weak. They erased me because my strength made them uncomfortable. That truth settled into me like a stone dropped into deep water. Not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable. And once I saw that truth, the sadness inside me began to quiet. Not disappear, but quiet. Enough for something stronger to emerge beneath it. I went to my bedroom and turned on the small amber lamp by my nightstand. The warm glow softened the shadows, touching the edges of the books stacked neatly beside the bed. I sat down, running my hand across the quilt my grandmother had stitched years ago. She was the only person in my family who ever saw me clearly, who ever told me I was more than the reliable daughter. She passed away when I was 19, and her absence left a space no one else ever attempted to fill. Looking at the quilt now, I felt a pang of longing, not for her presence, but for the way she would have guided me through this moment. She would have told me that boundaries aren't betrayals, and that self-respect is a form of love. She would have told me that sometimes the fall is the only way back to yourself. I lay back against the pillows and closed my eyes. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't press against you but holds you. My breathing slowed. The ache softened. And somewhere deep in my chest, a single thought rose to the surface. Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is the beginning. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't loud. They were a whisper, but a steady one. A whisper that carried a kind of truth I hadn't been strong enough to acknowledge before. Losing them wasn't the fall. Losing myself had been the fall. And reclaiming who I was, that was the rise. I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside my window. There was something comforting in that hum. A reminder that the world was still moving. That life continued. That possibilities still existed beyond the boundaries of a family who had never truly seen me. In the silence, in the isolation, in the slow, painful unraveling, I felt the spark again. Stronger this time. Brighter. Steadier. A spark that whispered not of revenge, but of self-return. A spark that signaled the first quiet shift toward something I had never realized I deserved. Peace on my own terms. And as I lay there, the glow from the lamp warming the edge of the room, I finally let myself accept it. I wasn't falling apart. I was waking up. The morning after my family stood in my doorway, pleading, demanding, insisting, I woke to a calm I hadn't felt in years. Not the fragile kind that shatters with one phone call, but the grounded kind. The kind that settles in your bones after you've finally told the truth your whole life has been pushing you toward. It was still dark outside, the sky a soft navy blue curtain, but the world inside me had changed. Something had clicked into place during that confrontation. Something steady, something old, something long ignored. I wasn't the girl they expected anymore. I wasn't the sister who stepped aside. Or the daughter who absorbed everyone's chaos? I wasn't the invisible foundation propping up their lives. I had stepped out of that role, and once I did, the freedom was impossible to unfeel. I sat on the edge of my bed, feet touching the cool floor, breathing slowly. My phone was on the nightstand, silent for the first time in days. They had exhausted themselves the night before. Calls, texts, messages sent in confusion and panic. A panic they had never felt until they needed something from me. It was almost poetic, the way the universe had turned their own choices into the lesson they refused to learn. I reached for the phone, not to check their messages, but to turn it face down again. Today wasn't about them. Today was about gathering myself, not for battle but for clarity. The city outside my window was waking gently, a slow hum rolling across the skyline as the first hints of pink touched the horizon. I wrapped my cardigan around my shoulders and walked into the kitchen. The quiet felt clean, like a room after a storm has passed, when everything is finally still enough to hear your own heartbeat. I made coffee and leaned against the counter, watching the steam rise from the mug in slow curls. And in that stillness I let myself think, not about the chaos, not about the wedding, but about the power I had used without raising my voice. Canceling the wedding had not been revenge. It had been a boundary finally honored. A truth spoken in action, not anger. A reclaiming. Quiet strength is often mistaken for submission, until the moment it stops serving everyone but itself. And once quiet strength stands up, there is no force on earth that can pretend it didn't hear it. My mind drifted back to the vendor emails, the confirmations, the refunds rolling in. One by one, the pieces of the wedding dissolved, not because I had wanted destruction, but because they had given me no choice. They had told me I didn't belong. They had said, "Don't come to the wedding." They had treated me like a funding source, not a sister. And the thing they never expected was that the woman they had pushed aside was the only one with the authority to pull the entire structure apart. I took another sip of coffee and let that truth settle inside me. Not as triumph but as understanding. This wasn't about punishing them. This was about honoring myself in a way I never had before. By late morning my inbox was full again. 40 new messages, all threads of panic disguised as urgency. I scrolled past them without opening a single one. The venue coordinator had written again. So had the florist. And the caterer. They were all forwarding frantic attempts from Lily, from Patricia, from my mother. Reading just the previews was enough to understand the tone. Desperate, confused, insistent. They had finally learned that authority isn't dictated by emotion. It's dictated by responsibility. Something they never respected until the consequences reached them. Around noon I stepped outside for a walk. The air was crisp, the sidewalks damp, the faint smell of rain still clinging to the breeze. I wrapped my scarf a little tighter and let the rhythm of my steps quiet the noise in my mind. Passing by the waterfront, I paused to watch light shimmer across the surface of the water, soft, gentle ripples catching pieces of the sky. The calm of it settled somewhere deep inside me. And as I stood there I realized something important. The fall had broken the illusion. But the rise was rebuilding me. Not into someone harder, but into someone whole. On my way back, I stopped by a small cafe near my building, a place I hadn't visited in months. The barista remembered me. That surprised me more than I expected. She smiled warmly and said, "Haven't seen you in a while. Everything okay?" I nodded. Better than okay. It was the first time I'd said those words in years and actually meant them. That afternoon, I finally sat down at my desk and opened a new folder on my laptop. I didn't name it wedding, or family, or problem. I named it something different, something true. My life forward. And in the weeks that followed, that folder became fuller than any other I had. Inside it, I wrote ideas I'd been putting off. Plans I'd never let myself consider. Saving strategies I'd postponed because family always came first. Therapy notes that helped me untangle the roots of my patterns. Vision lists, career goals, gentle reminders of what I deserved. This was the rise. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady, quiet, undeniable. But the world doesn't let transformation happen unnoticed. Not when the people who depended on your silence start feeling the cost of losing it. 2 days later, the doorbell rang again. This time I didn't freeze. I didn't brace myself. I simply walked toward the door with the calm of someone who had already made peace with her truth. Through the peephole I saw Patricia. Alone. Her posture straight, her expression tight, her composure intact, but her eyes holding something new. Something unguarded. Something uncomfortable. When I opened the door only a few inches, she exhaled quietly. "Amanda," she said, "we need to talk." Her voice wasn't commanding this time. It wasn't polished or clipped. It was careful. I held the door exactly as wide as I wanted it, no more, no less. Without inviting her in, I replied, "About what?" She swallowed, the stiffness in her shoulders tightening. "The wedding," she said. I met her gaze calmly. "There is no wedding." It was the first time she had ever been on the receiving end of a boundary she couldn't control. And she knew it. But this wasn't the moment for confrontation. This was the moment where the world finally saw what strength looks like when you stop hiding it. This was the revenge glow. Quiet, steady, unmistakable. Patricia's face tightened when she realized I wasn't stepping aside, wasn't apologizing, wasn't bending the way she had assumed I always would. She had walked into the hallway expecting the version of me she'd constructed. Quiet, compliant, grateful to be acknowledged at all. But the woman standing in the doorway wasn't the invisible sister who built a wedding, and then stepped out of the frame. I was someone she had never bothered to understand, and now she was seeing the cost of that for the very first time. She cleared her throat, adjusting the strap of her expensive handbag, as if rearranging her posture would help her rearrange the power between us. "I believe," she said carefully, "there's been a misunderstanding." "No," I replied softly. "There hasn't." A tiny crack formed in her composure. She wasn't used to being told no. Women like Patricia rarely are. Her eyes darted to the side, searching for her usual authority, but found none here. "We need the wedding reinstated," she said. "It's causing unnecessary complications." I tilted my head. Complications for whom? She hesitated. That alone told me everything. "For everyone," she insisted. "Connor's family is distraught. The guests are confused. Vendors are asking questions. Your mother is overwhelmed. And Lily, she's beside herself." A soft, calm breath left my chest. Not out of pity. Out of recognition. For the first time in her life, Lily was facing consequences no one could shield her from. "And what," I asked quietly, "does any of that have to do with me?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water, silent at first, then impossible to ignore. Patricia's expression flickered. She took a small step forward, but I didn't move. "You're her sister," she said. "Only when it benefits them," I replied. Her lips parted for a moment, but she found nothing to say. I let the silence stretch. Real power doesn't rush. It waits. Finally, she inhaled sharply. "Look," she said, lowering her voice. The text was poorly phrased. "They didn't mean." "They meant every word," I said. "And I meant mine." Patricia blinked. She wasn't prepared for the steadiness in my voice. She wasn't prepared for the ease with which I held the line. And she definitely wasn't prepared for the realization dawning in her eyes. She had underestimated me. When she spoke again, her tone was clipped, scraping against the edge of desperation she was trying to conceal. "We need you to fix this." There it was. The truth underneath all their panic. Not "we're sorry." Not "you were wronged." Just "fix this." I held her gaze. "I'm not your fixer." For a moment, the hallway was silent except for her shallow breathing. She opened her mouth again, but the next voice that filled the hallway wasn't hers. It was Lily's. She had been standing at the bottom of the stairs, eyes red, shoulders trembling. I hadn't heard her arrive, but the desperation in her expression was impossible to miss. She walked toward us with a shakiness I hadn't seen since we were children. "Amanda." Her voice cracked. "Please." I didn't move. "Please what?" Her chin trembled. "Please put the wedding back." There was no apology in her voice. Just need. Just expectation. Just the unspoken belief that I would eventually fold. But I was done folding. "You told me not to come," I said gently. "You told me I wasn't wanted." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean." "You meant it enough to send the message." Lily pressed a hand to her mouth as if the words physically hurt her. Patricia stepped forward, ready to take over again, but Lily lifted a hand to stop her. And for the first time, Patricia stepped back. Not out of respect, but because she didn't know how to fix something she no longer controlled. Lily's voice was barely a whisper. Everything is falling apart. I nodded. It tends to when the foundation isn't honest. She swallowed hard. I didn't think you'd actually do it. For the first time a faint sadness, not regret, not guilt, just sadness touched my voice. That's exactly the problem, Lily. None of you thought I had limits. We stood there, three women suspended in a moment none of us had prepared for. The air between us felt heavy with truth, the kind that comes too late to change anything but early enough to hurt. Patricia regained her voice first. This is childish, she snapped. You're sabotaging an entire wedding because of a text message. I cut her off with a calm firmness that surprised even her. I canceled a wedding because I was the signer. Because I was the one legally responsible. Because I was the one who paid. And because I was told I wasn't welcome. That's not childish. That's clarity. Her jaw tightened. We can take legal action. I smiled, not with amusement but with certainty. You can try, I said simply. But the contracts won't change. My signatures won't change. The cancellation policies won't change. And the venue already told you. They won't reinstate anything without me. The truth hit them like a quiet, devastating blow. I wasn't threatening them. I wasn't punishing them. I was just acknowledging the reality they created. Lily's shoulders finally sagged, the weight of the situation pulling her into a posture she had never been forced to carry before. She looked up at me with eyes full of something new. Not entitlement, not expectation but recognition. Amanda, she whispered. What do you want? The question she should have asked months ago. Years ago. Maybe our whole lives ago. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know the answer but because I wanted the moment to settle. To breathe. To be undeniable. I want peace, I said softly. Lily's breath hitched. And the wedding? I felt something deep inside me shift into place. The wedding, I said, is no longer my responsibility. For a long moment none of us moved. Then with nothing left to argue, nothing left to demand, nothing left to manipulate, Patricia and Lily stepped back. Not out of defeat, but out of understanding. They finally saw the truth. I hadn't taken their wedding away. They had given it up the moment they decided I wasn't worthy of being there. And my quiet strength, the strength they mistook for compliance, was the thing they could now see clearly for the first time. Unshakable, calm, and completely done being used. The morning after Patricia and Lily walked away from my door, the world felt strangely quiet. Not empty, just quieter in a way that settled into my home like soft dust after a long shattering collapse. The hurt was still there, lying low in my chest like the echo of a bruise, but something else had risen above it. Something steadier. Something clearer. I opened the curtain slowly, letting pale light spill across the living room floor. The sky outside was soft and gray, the kind of Seattle morning that usually felt heavy, but today it felt cleansing. Like the world was giving me permission to breathe without apologizing. I moved through the apartment in a slow rhythm, touching the back of a chair, adjusting a frame on the wall, folding a blanket that had fallen half off the couch. These simple gestures felt different now. Not chores, not distractions, but small acknowledgments of a space that finally belonged to me alone. It struck me how long it had been since I'd seen my home as a refuge instead of a temporary resting point between the crises of other people. For years I had been the sister who rushed, the daughter who handled, the woman who absorbed. Now I was just a person standing in the soft morning light, free from the noise of expectation. And freedom, as it turned out, didn't feel loud. It felt like quiet air filling my lungs without hesitation. I made coffee and wrapped my hands around the warm mug, holding it close to my chest as I stood by the window. Cars rolled slowly through the street below. A woman walked her dog, bundled against the cold. Life outside moved at its usual pace, indifferent to the drama that had consumed my family. There was something comforting about that. The world hadn't collapsed, only a version of my place in it had. And losing that version made space for something new, something I hadn't known how to imagine before. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop to sort through the last of the vendor emails. Refund confirmations were coming in steadily now, organized, polite, professional. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional. Just clean closure. Each message felt like a quiet step back toward myself, as if dismantling the wedding piece by piece wasn't just undoing an event. It was undoing a lifetime of being taken for granted. With every confirmation I felt lighter. Mom tried to call again. I watched her name light up the screen then fade. She left a voicemail, her tone wavering between anger and confusion, but I didn't listen. I wasn't avoiding her. I was choosing myself. That evening I lit a candle on the dining table, the same table where I had once sat for hours planning Lily's dream ceremony. The flame flickered softly in the dim room, casting warm shadows across my walls. I ate dinner alone, but the silence didn't sting the way it used to. It felt intentional, chosen, not imposed. It felt peaceful. A week passed like that. Quietly, gently, intentionally. And somewhere within that quiet, something inside me began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, like dawn finding its way over the edge of a mountainside. My shoulders didn't feel as tight. My breathing came easier. My mind, once crammed with to-do lists and other people's emergencies, began to open its own doors again. I found myself leaning toward things I had put off for years. Long walks by the water, old books I'd never finished, recipes I'd saved but never tried. It felt like rediscovering corners of myself I had abandoned while tending to everyone else's needs. Therapy helped too. Dr. Marlene didn't ask about the wedding at first. She asked about me. "What does peace look like for you?" she whispered in that warm, even tone I'd missed. I didn't know how to answer for a long moment. But when I finally did, the words came softly. "Space," I said. "Breathing room. Not being needed every second." "And who told you that needing space was selfish?" she asked gently. My eyes blurred with a sadness I hadn't allowed myself to feel. "My family," I whispered. "And I believed them." She smiled in that quiet, compassionate way that felt like a hand resting on a shaking shoulder. "You don't believe them anymore." It wasn't a question. It was a truth. And she was right. I didn't. One evening, about 2 weeks after everything collapsed, I found myself sitting by Lake Union with a cup of tea. The water was calm, reflecting the soft golden shimmer of early sunset. Boats drifted lazily across the surface, leaving gentle ripples behind them. I watched those ripples widen, fade, then disappear, and I thought about how similar they were to pain. How they arrive suddenly, expand slowly, and eventually dissolve into something calmer if you stop trying to fight them. A small breeze brushed my hair. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of cold water and winter air. And it hit me then, not with force but with quiet clarity. I wasn't grieving them anymore. I was grieving who I had been for them. That old version of me. The dependable sister, the invisible daughter, the financial safety net. She had carried weight she was never meant to carry. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to resurrect her. I was letting her rest. A few days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Handwritten. Neat. Familiar. Lily's handwriting. I held it for a long moment before opening it. Inside, her words were surprisingly calm. Not dramatic. Not guilt-laden. Not manipulative. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for the wedding back. She didn't blame me. She simply wrote, "I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I depended on your strength until it wasn't there. I didn't realize how much I hurt you until you walked away. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I finally see you." I read the lines twice. Then a third time. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I didn't soften immediately. Instead, I folded the letter neatly, placed it in a drawer, not to forget it but to give it time. Healing, I realized, wasn't the act of rushing to repair what broke. Healing was learning to honor yourself enough to decide what deserves to return into your life, and what doesn't. Weeks passed. I redecorated my apartment, bought a few plants, donated boxes of old things, hung new artwork, let sunlight in through windows I used to keep shuttered. My home became a reflection of who I was becoming, someone quieter, yes, but stronger in ways I had never given myself credit for. One morning I stood by my window as the sun broke across the skyline, spilling gold onto the tops of buildings. The warmth touched my face and I felt a softness settle into my chest, something close to peace but deeper, something like renewal. And in that moment, with the city glowing beneath me, I understood something I had never spoken out loud. Revenge hadn't felt like fire. It had felt like light. Calm, illuminating, restorative light. The kind that returns after a storm, not to destroy but to reveal. It revealed my boundaries, my quiet power, my worth, my future, my glow. And standing there in the golden morning, I whispered to myself, I'm finally free. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who understands quiet strength. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It's the courage to begin again. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your stories matter here.